It was a bright, sunny afternoon, and the small local bank was humming with the usual activity. People were coming and going, some waiting patiently in line, others hurriedly finishing their transactions. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and freshly printed forms, and the soft murmur of conversations filled the room, creating a sense of normal, everyday life. A young black boy, no more than 10 years old, walked into the bank holding a check in his hand. His shoes squeaked slightly against the polished floor as he stepped forward, his heart beating a little faster than usual. It wasn't every day that he came to the bank alone, and even though his father had trusted him to handle this simple task, he couldn't shake off the nervous feeling fluttering in his chest. He paused for a moment near the entrance, taking in the rows of counters and the people behind them. Tellers were typing away at their computers, a few customers were speaking quietly to staff, and a couple of children were tugging at their parents' sleeves, trying to get their attention. The boy gripped the check a little tighter, straightened his shirt, and reminded himself to stay calm. It's just a check. Nothing complicated, he whispered under his breath. He moved toward the counter where a middle-aged bank manager was seated, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. She was reviewing some papers, her glasses perched on the tip of her nose, and occasionally she would glance up at a customer, nodding briefly. The boy cleared his throat gently, hoping to get her attention without disturbing anyone else. "Good afternoon," he said politely, trying to sound confident even though his voice shook a little. The bank manager looked up, gave a quick nod, and gestured for him to place the check on the counter. The boy carefully handed it over, making sure it didn't bend or tear. He had practiced this 100 times in his mind, imagining the check sliding smoothly across the counter and being accepted without any problem. For a few moments, everything seemed calm and normal. The boy watched as the manager picked up the check and examined it carefully. Her eyes scanned the numbers and the writing, and she adjusted her glasses slightly as if trying to make sense of what she was seeing. He thought she might smile or at least say something reassuring, but instead, her face remained serious, almost stern. Around him, the bank carried on as usual, but the boy could feel a small knot forming in his stomach. He was suddenly very aware of every little sound, the tapping of keyboards, the rustling of papers, the faint beeping of machines. Even the soft cough of an elderly man waiting in line seemed louder than before. It was as if the whole bank had narrowed down to just him, the check, and the manager's sharp gaze. He remembered what his father had told him before leaving the house: stay calm, speak clearly, and always be polite. No matter what happens, just handle it responsibly. The boy repeated those words in his mind like a mantra, trying to steady his nerves. He took a deep breath, hoping it would make him appear more confident than he felt. As he waited, he noticed the other customers glancing at him curiously, some whispering to each other. The boy felt a little embarrassed, wishing he could disappear into the background. He wondered if anyone had ever torn up a check like this before, and the thought made him shiver. He could only hope today wasn't the day that would happen to him. The bank manager finally looked up, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, he thought she might smile, but instead, she nodded for him to explain what the check was for. "This is for my dad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper at first, then louder as he gained a little courage. "He asked me to deposit it for him." She raised an eyebrow and adjusted her glasses again, her expression unreadable, making the boy wonder if he had said something wrong. Even though he felt nervous, there was something comforting about being trusted with this task. The boy knew that this check was important, not just because of the money, but because it was a way his father showed that he trusted him. That thought gave him a little boost of courage, and he stood a little taller, holding the check firmly on the counter, ready for whatever came next. Around him, the bank continued its usual rhythm, but for the young boy, time seemed to slow down. Every second felt important, every glance from the manager felt like it carried weight. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, a steady reminder that even a simple task could feel enormous when you wanted to do it right. And in that moment, the boy understood something important about grown-up places like banks. They could be intimidating, serious, and full of rules, but they were also places where small acts of responsibility mattered, where being polite and careful could make a big difference. Little did he know, this ordinary visit to the bank was about to turn into an experience he would never forget. The bank manager leaned back slightly in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she studied the check in front of her. It wasn't the first time she had handled a large payment, but something about this one made her pause. She traced the numbers with her finger, muttering quietly to herself, double-checking the date and the amount. She had seen her fair share of mistakes, forged documents, and even scams, and her instincts told her to be careful. The young boy watched her nervously, his small hands clutching the counter for support. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach, wondering if he had done something wrong. His eyes flicked toward the other customers, some whispering softly to one another, casting curious glances his way. He felt exposed, like everyone could see his fear. Every second stretched longer, and the once calm bank suddenly felt enormous and intimidating. "Do you know what this check is for?" the manager asked, her voice calm but firm. Her gaze was sharp, making the boy feel even smaller than he already did. "It's from my dad," he replied quickly, trying to sound confident. "He asked me to deposit it here." The manager didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned closer, squinting at the writing and the signature, her fingers tapping the counter lightly. A cold tension filled the air, as if something invisible was building between them. The boy tried to remain calm, remembering what his father had told him: always be polite, and don't panic. Speak clearly. He repeated the words silently in his head, but it didn't seem to make the fear disappear. Instead, it made him more aware of the consequences if something went wrong. His imagination ran wild, picturing a torn check, angry voices, and embarrassment in front of the whole bank. Suddenly, without warning, the manager reached for the check with a firm grip, and in one swift motion, she tore it in half. The boy froze, his eyes widening in shock. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The crumpled pieces of paper lay on the counter like evidence of a crime. He tried to speak, but no words came out. His throat felt tight, and his heart raced as a flush of humiliation spread across his cheeks. People around them began to notice, their eyes flicking from the torn check to the boy. Some whispered quietly to each other, others stared openly. The boy felt like everyone was watching him, judging him. Even though he had done nothing wrong, he wanted to shrink down, to disappear behind the counter, but he knew he couldn't. His father had entrusted him with this task, and now he had to face the consequences. "Why did you do that?" he finally managed to whisper, his voice trembling. The manager looked at him, her expression unreadable, and said, "It doesn't look right. I can't accept it like this." The boy shook his head, confusion and panic mixing together. He had followed every instruction, every rule, yet here he was, feeling helpless in a place he had thought would be safe. For the first time, the young boy realized that sometimes, grown-ups could make mistakes too. Sometimes, authority didn't mean fairness, and rules could feel harsh when applied without understanding. He wanted to explain, to tell the manager that his father was a respected man, but he didn't have the words, and he didn't know if it would matter. His small hands fidgeted nervously on the counter, and a tear threatened to escape. The tension in the bank grew heavier, the air seemed thicker, charged with the mix of surprise, embarrassment, and anticipation. Other customers shifted in their seats, sensing that something unusual was happening. Even the usually quiet bank felt like it had been transformed into a stage, and the young boy was the main character in a story he hadn't wanted to star in. In that moment, the boy realized that life could be unpredictable, even in the most ordinary places. A simple trip to deposit a check had suddenly turned into an emotional challenge, testing his patience, courage, and ability to stay composed under pressure. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, knowing that whatever happened next, he would need to face it with as much bravery as he could muster. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of an extraordinary chain of events. The torn check would not just be a mistake, it would become a turning point, a moment that would change how the manager saw him, how the people around him saw him, and ultimately, how his life unfolded that day. The boy's world, once simple and predictable, had suddenly become full of suspense, tension, and the promise of something unimaginable. The young boy stood frozen behind the counter, staring at the torn check, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He felt a swirl of emotions, confusion, fear, and a growing sense of injustice. How could something so simple go so wrong? He had followed every instruction, done everything right, and yet here he was, feeling small and powerless in front of a bank manager who didn't even know him. Tears began to sting his eyes, but he blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back. He didn't want to cry in front of strangers, didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing him falter, but inside, a storm of humiliation and frustration raged. His hands trembled slightly as he clenched them into fists, gripping the counter for support. He wanted to speak, to explain, to make her understand, but the words seemed trapped in his throat. "Please," "It's from my dad," he said finally, his voice shaking but firm enough to be heard. "He asked me to deposit it here. It's real. It's all correct." The manager looked at him over her glasses, her expression unreadable. She didn't smile, didn't soften, just continued to examine the torn pieces, her fingers tapping the counter lightly as if counting down the seconds. The boy swallowed hard, trying to stay calm, but the whispers of the other customers made him feel even smaller. Did she really just tear up a check for a kid? One person murmured, "Is this some kind of scam?" Another whispered. Their voices, though quiet, echoed in his mind, making him question himself, making him feel as if he had done something terribly wrong. He took a deep breath, remembering the advice his father had given him: speak politely, stay calm, and be confident. Never let fear take over. He tried to repeat it silently in his mind like a shield, a mantra to protect him from the growing embarrassment, but the knot in his stomach refused to loosen, and his small voice seemed almost invisible against the seriousness of the situation. The manager finally spoke, her tone measured but firm. "I can't accept this check like this. Something doesn't seem right." Her words hit him like a cold wave, leaving him stunned. He wanted to cry out, to shout, to demand she look at it again, but he knew that would only make things worse. He felt trapped, stuck in a situation that wasn't his fault but felt entirely his responsibility. Around him, the bank seemed to shrink, the noise fading into the background, leaving only him, the torn check, and the manager's piercing gaze. He could feel the eyes of the other customers on him, some curious, some sympathetic, but it didn't matter. They couldn't help, only he could face this moment, and he had to find the courage to do it. He tried again, his voice a little louder this time. "I promise it's real. My dad is very responsible. He wouldn't make a mistake." He looked directly at her, hoping to find a spark of understanding in her eyes, some small hint that she would see him, not just the torn paper. His heart ached with hope and fear at the same time, a confusing mix of emotions that made him feel both small and brave all at once. For the first time, he realized how unfair life could feel, how adults, even those in positions of authority, could make mistakes, judge too quickly, and misinterpret the truth. He wondered why things couldn't be simpler, why trust and honesty sometimes seemed invisible to those who should notice it most. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, heavier than any backpack or homework ever had. Despite everything, he refused to give up. He took a steadying breath, his small hand still clutching the edge of the counter, determined to stand his ground, to represent himself and his father with dignity. He knew that this moment was bigger than the torn check, bigger than the embarrassment. It was about proving that truth and honesty mattered, even when no one seemed to notice. Little did he know, the situation was about to take a sudden, unexpected turn, one that would shift the entire room, change the dynamics between him and the manager, and reveal a truth that no one in the bank could have predicted. The young boy's courage and patience were about to be rewarded, and the ordinary afternoon was about to become extraordinary. Just as the boy felt his courage beginning to falter, the soft sound of footsteps echoed through the bank, steady and purposeful. He looked up, and for the first time, relief washed over him. His father had arrived. Sensing that something was wrong, the young boy's heart leapt with hope, and a small flicker of confidence returned. The father, a tall man with a calm and commanding presence, approached the counter, his eyes scanning the scene immediately. He noticed the torn check lying in front of the boy, the look of fear and embarrassment on his face, and the bank manager's serious, unyielding expression. He stopped just a few feet away, his presence filling the space, making it feel as if the entire bank had paused for a moment. "Is everything all right here?" His voice was calm but carried a subtle authority that made the manager straighten in her chair. The young boy took a deep breath, hoping his father's arrival would change the situation. "Dad," he whispered, a mix of relief and worry in his voice. She tore the check." His words faltered as he gestured toward the torn pieces, his small hands trembling slightly. The father's eyes softened as he crouched slightly to meet his son's gaze, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," he said gently, "we'll handle this together." The boy felt a surge of comfort, knowing he wasn't alone anymore. That small reassurance was enough to make him feel braver, and he straightened his posture slightly, ready to face the moment with his father by his side. The bank manager, sensing the father's presence and authority, shifted in her seat, her stern expression faltering slightly. She had seen many customers over the years, but there was something different about this man, something in his calm confidence and composed demeanor made her suddenly more aware of the situation's gravity. She could feel a tension in the air, as if the room itself was waiting for the next move. The father leaned slightly forward, his eyes kindly but piercing. "I understand you have concerns," he said, addressing the manager directly, "but this check is completely legitimate. My son was simply doing what I asked him to do, and he did it responsibly. He deserves respect, not doubt." In this situation, the manager blinked, caught off guard by the clarity and calmness in his voice. For the first time, she realized that she may have overreacted, acting on assumptions rather than facts. The young boy watched his father speak, a mix of awe and relief swelling in his chest. He had always known his father was successful, but seeing him handle this calmly, without anger or harsh words, made him feel proud in a way he hadn't before. His father was teaching him, without saying it outright, that patience, confidence, and kindness could be more powerful than fear or intimidation. Other customers in the bank began to notice the change in atmosphere. Their whispers slowed as they realized something significant was happening. Even those who had been watching skeptically now leaned forward slightly, curious to see how the situation would unfold. The torn check no longer seemed like a simple mistake. It had become the center of a lesson in respect, authority, and understanding. The father reached out, gently picking up the torn pieces of the check. "I hope this clears up any confusion," he said softly, handing them to the manager. His calm, patient approach contrasted sharply with the earlier tension, and it seemed to dissolve the unease that had filled the room moments before. The bank manager took a deep breath, her hands hovering over the paper, and finally nodded. The young boy felt his chest swell with relief, a small smile forming despite the earlier fear. He had survived the moment, not just because his father was there, but because he had stayed composed, polite, and patient. Even in the face of embarrassment and misunderstanding, he had done his best, and that effort had been recognized. As the manager began to carefully examine the check again, this time with understanding rather than suspicion, the father stayed close to his son, giving him a quiet nod of encouragement. It was a simple gesture, but for the young boy, it meant everything. That small gesture made him feel seen, respected, and proud. Even in the most ordinary places, he realized, extraordinary lessons could unfold. And in that moment, the boy understood something powerful, that even when mistakes happen, even when authority seems harsh or unfair, patience, honesty, and the support of those who believe in you can turn any situation around. The ordinary bank visit had transformed into a defining moment, one the young boy would never forget, and one that would leave everyone present with a story to remember. The bank manager held the torn pieces of the check in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly as she examined them once more. She had dealt with countless transactions over the years, but something about this one made her pause. The father's calm presence and steady gaze made it impossible to act hastily, yet the realization of what she was holding began to sink in slowly, like a heavy weight pressing on her chest. The young boy watched nervously, unsure what would happen next. His father's hand rested gently on his shoulder, a silent gesture of reassurance. He had seen adults handle money before, but never had he witnessed the quiet power of someone speaking calmly and confidently. There was a strange tension in the air, a mix of suspense, fear, and curiosity, and the boy felt as though time had slowed, each second stretching into eternity. "Do you realize who I am?" the father asked finally, his voice calm but firm. The words were simple, yet carried an unmistakable weight. The bank manager froze, blinking in disbelief. Her mind raced as she tried to process what he had just said. Could it be possible? A child carrying a simple check from an ordinary-seeming father, only to discover that he was someone of enormous wealth and influence. "Yes," the father continued, "I am the COO of a multinational company. This payment is valid. My son was only following my instructions, and he handled it responsibly, as I expected him to." The bank manager's eyes widened, her jaw tightening as she struggled to maintain her composure. The reality of the situation hit her like a sudden storm, washing over her in waves of shock and regret. The young boy's eyes widened in surprise as well. He had known his father was successful, but hearing the bank manager acknowledge his father's identity out loud made the world feel suddenly bigger, more powerful, yet strangely reassuring. The tension that had seemed unbearable moments ago began to lift, replaced by awe and wonder. He realized that the torn check, once a symbol of fear and embarrassment, was about to become a lesson in humility and understanding for everyone in the room. Around them, the other customers began to whisper, the murmurs growing louder. Their curiosity piqued as they pieced together the story: the young boy, the torn check, and the father who was not just anyone, but a billionaire COO. The bank manager, feeling the eyes of everyone on her, suddenly became painfully aware of her earlier mistake, of the assumptions she had made, and the snap judgment that had led to this awkward and tense moment. Her hands shook slightly as she handed the pieces of the check back to the father. I didn't know, she stammered, her voice soft and apologetic. I acted too quickly, and I'm very sorry. The father nodded, his calm demeanor never faltering. I understand, he replied gently, it's a human mistake. What matters is that lessons are learned and respect is shown. The young boy felt his chest swell with pride, grateful for his father's patience and composure. The bank manager finally allowed herself to breathe, her shoulders relaxing slightly as she realized the gravity of the situation. She had judged too quickly, acted too harshly, and now she had learned firsthand the importance of patience, humility, and the unseen stories behind every customer who walked through her doors. Even in a place she thought she controlled, she had been reminded that appearances could be deceiving, and every person has a story worth understanding. The young boy, still holding his father's hand, felt a sense of wonder and relief wash over him. His embarrassment had melted away, replaced by awe at how quickly life could change. He had learned that courage, patience, and honesty could stand strong even in moments of fear, and he realized that mistakes, even big, public ones, could be forgiven when humility and respect guided the response. In that quiet moment, as the bank slowly returned to its normal rhythm, the torn check no longer symbolized fear or shame, but transformation. It had revealed truths about judgment, respect, and the power of character, not money, and the young boy, standing next to his father, knew this day would remain etched in his memory forever, a story of surprise, lessons, and a life-changing revelation that no one present would ever forget. The bank manager took a deep, shaky breath, her eyes fixed on the young boy and his father. The weight of what had just happened pressed heavily on her chest. She had acted too quickly, let assumptions guide her judgment, and now she faced the consequences, not just in the awkward silence of the bank, but in the lesson she had learned the hard way. I truly apologize, she said, her voice soft but sincere. Should not have torn the check. I acted out of caution, but I see now that I judged too quickly. The father nodded slowly, his calm presence steadying the moment. It's all right, he replied gently, mistakes happen. What matters is recognizing them and making things right. The young boy felt a small wave of relief, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in what felt like hours. The manager's hands trembled slightly as she carefully began to piece the check back together, her actions deliberate and respectful. Each torn fragment symbolized not just a financial mistake, but a personal one, a moment where she had allowed fear and assumption to outweigh understanding and patience. She looked at the young boy, her expression softening further. I am sorry for causing you any embarrassment, she said. It was not your fault, and you handled the situation with courage. The boy blinked, surprised by her words. He had expected anger, scolding, or maybe even disappointment, but instead, he found understanding. His father's hand on his shoulder reminded him that humility could turn any situation around. He realized that the bank manager's apology was more than just words. It was a lesson in how people could learn and grow, even in uncomfortable moments. Around them, the other customers shifted slightly, some offering nods of approval, others whispering quietly among themselves. They had witnessed a transformation unfold in real time. A simple banking transaction had become a living example of empathy, patience, and accountability. The atmosphere in the bank softened, the tension melting like morning mist in sunlight. The young boy felt a surge of pride, not for himself alone, but for the people around him who had chosen to acknowledge the truth and take responsibility. He realized that courage wasn't just about facing challenges, but about standing up for what is right, even when you are small and everyone seems larger than life. His father smiled at him, a quiet, proud smile that made the boy's chest swell with warmth. The bank manager straightened, taking one last look at the boy and his father. Thank you for your patience, she said, her tone more confident now, and thank you for showing me that assumptions can be wrong, and every person has a story behind their actions. The father nodded once, acknowledging the sincerity in her words. The boy felt a lesson settle deep inside him, one he knew he would carry forever, about respect, understanding, and the power of calm integrity. The torn check, now carefully smoothed and restored, seemed almost symbolic, a tangible representation of mistakes corrected and lessons learned. What had started as fear and embarrassment had transformed into a moment of connection and growth. Each person in the room had witnessed it, the manager, the boy, the father, and even the customers watching quietly from their seats. The young boy looked at the bank manager one last time, offering a small, polite smile. "Thank you," he whispered, not just for her apology, but for showing him that people can change, that kindness can emerge even after mistakes. The manager returned the smile, small but genuine, and nodded, acknowledging that understanding had bridged the gap between them. As the father collected the check and guided his son toward the exit, the boy felt a sense of calm he had never known in a bank before. He had faced fear, embarrassment, and judgment, but he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. He had learned that even ordinary moments could hold extraordinary lessons, and that patience, courage, and empathy could change the course of a day, a story, or even a life. And as they stepped out into the sunlight, leaving the bank behind, the young boy knew that this day, with all its tension, surprise, and revelation, would stay with him forever, a story not about wealth or status, but about humanity, humility, and the power of understanding. One simple act of apology had turned a moment of fear into a memory of growth, connection, and respect. The young boy walked beside his father, stepping carefully out of the bank, his small hand clutching the repaired check. He felt a mixture of relief and pride swirling in his chest. What had begun as a simple task, a routine visit to deposit a check, had transformed into something much bigger, a story of courage, patience, and understanding that he would never forget. His father looked down at him with a quiet smile. "You did very well today," he said. His voice was calm but full of warmth. "You stayed polite, patient, and brave, even when it felt difficult. That is something no one can take from you." The boy's chest swelled with pride. He had faced fear, embarrassment, and judgment, and he had come through it with grace, guided by his father's gentle wisdom. The bank manager's apology still echoed in his mind. Her sincerity had surprised him. He realized that people can make mistakes, even those in positions of authority, and that it was possible for them to recognize their errors and make amends. This simple act of humility had turned an uncomfortable situation into a lesson about understanding and respect. "Sometimes, people act out of caution or fear," his father continued, "but that doesn't mean we stop believing in ourselves. You showed honesty and courage, and that mattered more than anything else today." The young boy nodded slowly, taking in every word. He understood now that strength wasn't about being the loudest or the biggest, but about standing tall, even when others doubted you. The father paused, looking back at the bank, and added, "And it's important to remember that everyone has a story we might not know." The bank manager acted as she thought best, but once she understood, she took responsibility. That's a lesson for all of us. Humility, respect, and patience can change even difficult moments. The boy thought about the murmurs of the customers who had watched the entire scene unfold, and he realized they too had learned something from this ordinary turned extraordinary moment. As they walked down the street, the sun glinting on the pavement, the boy reflected on how small actions could carry big lessons. A simple act, staying calm, speaking clearly, and following instructions, had guided him through an overwhelming situation, and the apology from the manager, a moment of human understanding, had turned fear into connection, embarrassment into pride. The young boy looked up at his father, curiosity sparkling in his eyes. "Dad, do you think she will remember this for a long time?" he asked. His father chuckled softly, a deep, warm sound. "Yes, I believe she will. And I hope she remembers that kindness and humility are always stronger than judgment and haste. We all carry these lessons forward, in every place we go, in every person we meet." The boy nodded, feeling the weight and importance of those words settle inside him. In that quiet moment, the boy understood that the bank was more than just a place for money. It was a stage for real human stories, where fear, courage, humility, and respect played out in ways that left lasting impressions. He realized that lessons in life often came when least expected, hidden in the ordinary routines of everyday life, waiting for someone brave enough to notice and learn from them. The father stopped for a moment, kneeling slightly to meet his son's gaze. "Remember this day, son," he said softly. "It is not about wealth or status, but about honesty, courage, and character. These are the things that matter most." People will judge, mistakes will happen, but how you respond, with patience and respect, defines who you are. The young boy absorbed every word, feeling them sink deeply into his heart, a lesson more valuable than any amount of money. As they continued their walk home, the boy felt a quiet strength within him, a sense of pride not just in what he had accomplished, but in the understanding he had gained. He knew that this day, the torn check, the tense moments, and the eventual apology would stay with him forever, a story of growth, resilience, and humanity, a story he would carry in his heart and share one day with others. And though the bank manager had acted hastily, the experience had become a shared lesson for everyone involved, proving that mistakes could lead to understanding, and that every person, no matter their age or position, could make a difference through courage, patience, and respect. The young boy walked on beside his father, the repaired check in his hand, and a new sense of confidence lighting his way, ready for whatever life might bring next. The young boy walked beside his father, the repaired check now safely tucked into his pocket. The sun shone warmly on the street outside the bank, but the boy's mind was full of the lessons, emotions, and memories of the afternoon. What had started as an ordinary errand had become an extraordinary story he would never forget. As they turned the corner, the father looked down at him with a gentle smile. "Do you understand what today has taught you?" he asked. His voice was calm, patient, and full of quiet authority. The boy nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the lesson settle deep inside him. He realized that courage, honesty, and patience were far more valuable than any amount of money, and that true respect could be earned even in the smallest moments. "People will make mistakes," his father continued, "even grown-ups, even those in positions of authority. But what matters is how we respond. Do we react with anger, or do we respond with understanding and patience? Today, you showed both honesty and bravery. That is something no one can take away from you." The boy's chest swelled with pride, and he straightened his shoulders, feeling taller than he ever had before. The bank manager's apology, though she was no longer present, lingered in his mind, reminding him that even mistakes could lead to growth. The moment of humiliation he had feared had transformed into a lesson about empathy, humility, and respect. He understood now that sometimes, people act from fear or misunderstanding, but that didn't mean they couldn't learn or change. As they walked further, the father reflected aloud, "And never forget, appearances can be deceiving. Just because someone looks ordinary, doesn't mean their story is. People carry experiences, wealth, struggles, and wisdom that we may never see." Today, the lesson was not just for you, but for everyone who witnessed it. The boy looked up at his father in awe, realizing the truth in those words. His life had been touched by a simple act of banking, a torn check, and a human connection that revealed far more than numbers on paper. The father paused for a moment, letting the boy take it all in. Life will challenge you in unexpected ways. You will face moments where you feel small, judged, or misunderstood. But if you stay calm, honest, and respectful, you can navigate anything. The young boy nodded again, fully understanding the power of these words. They were not just lessons for a day at the bank, but lessons for a lifetime. The boy glanced back toward the bank one last time, remembering the murmurs of the other customers, the tension in the air, and the moment when everything had seemed to hang in balance. He realized that ordinary places could hold extraordinary stories, that courage and integrity could shine in the most unexpected moments, and that even mistakes could be transformed into lessons of growth and understanding. His father squeezed his shoulder gently, smiling. "You have learned something today that many adults never understand. Life is not about wealth or status, it's about honesty, courage, respect, and the way we treat others. Remember that, and you will always carry something more valuable than money in your heart." The boy felt warmth and clarity fill him. He knew that this day, the torn check, the tension, and the eventual apology would stay with him forever. And as they continued walking, the boy felt a sense of quiet strength he had never known before. He had faced fear, embarrassment, and judgment, yet he had come through with patience, courage, and grace, guided by his father's calm wisdom. He understood that life could surprise you in the smallest moments, that lessons could hide in ordinary errands, and that true growth often comes from challenges and unexpected twists. The repaired check in his pocket was more than just a piece of paper. It was a symbol of resilience, understanding, and transformation, a reminder that even ordinary days could hold extraordinary lessons, and that humility, patience, and respect could turn fear into connection, mistakes into learning, and embarrassment into pride. The young boy walked forward, side by side with his father, feeling stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever. A simple trip to the bank had become a story of courage, lessons, and life-changing realizations, one he would carry forever, a memory that proved that even in ordinary moments, extraordinary lessons await, if only we have the courage to notice, understand, and grow.